You're listening to an Eyes on Washington podcast brought to you by Holland and Knight's Public Policy and Regulation Group. Our Public Policy and Regulation Group is a strong bipartisan team with deep ties throughout Washington, D.C. We have built a thriving government affairs practice through our depth of experience and diversity and by maintaining our bipartisan approach. Our State Attorneys General podcast series is hosted by former Deputy Attorney General of Virginia and presidential appointee at the U.S. Department of Commerce, Stephen Cobb. Through conversations with State Attorneys General, this series will dive into the importance and growing role of State Attorneys General while hearing firsthand on what they are working to accomplish in their communities.
Welcome to Holland and Knight's Eyes on Washington podcast. My name is Stephen Cobb. I'm a partner in the Public Policy and Regulatory section at Holland and Knight, and I'll be with you from time to time talking about everything that is State Attorneys General. So I'm very happy to welcome the Attorney General of Nevada with us today, Aaron Ford. We're very excited to have him here with us. General Ford, you have a fantastic background from educator to majority leader of the Nevada State Senate to Attorney General. Can you tell our listeners just kind of first a little bit about your background and how that's led to the office of Attorney General and perhaps how that influences some of your priorities in the office?
Absolutely. First off, Stephen, let me say thank you so much for having me, and kudos to you for two pronunciations that you've gotten correct. First off is my name, Aaron. Thank you for that. A lot of people call me Aaron. I pronounce it, and I respond to it. And now because of Key and Peele, a lot of people want to call me Aaron, and I do respond to that as well. But my name is Aaron, so thank you for that correct pronunciation. And then also Nevada. You said Nevada and not Nevada. And that's good, because I must say anyone who comes to our state and mispronounces it might get upcharged. So thank you so much for pronouncing the state correctly as well. But again, Stephen, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my office, our role, what we do, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. To your question, though, of my background and how it informs and advises what I do in this office. I am from inner city Dallas, Texas. Now born with a silver spoon, not entirely tarnished, but I have an understanding of how government can help people get to the next level. My parents divorced when I was young, and my mom made me, quote unquote, man of the house until my stepdad came onto the scene, and that required me to take care of my younger brothers, meaning sometimes I had to ensure they got the dinner or the breakfast or help them with the homework or whatnot. And that was in addition to my main job, my mom told me, which was to keep my head in the books. That's a quote of hers that I still use to this day in instructing my own sons to keep their head in the books. And, I was a decent student. She got me in a program called Project Upward Bound, which was my first real understanding of how government can help. It was a program for people like me who didn't have the money or wherewithal necessarily to go to college, and whose parents didn't go to college either. So it was a college preparatory program that the government funded at Southern Methodist University. Literally saved my life, and I don't say that with any hyperbole. Instead of having me on the streets on Saturdays or in the summers, I was at SMU on Saturdays studying, and for 6 weeks in the summer at SMU studying and taking practice SATs, getting ready to do better in high school and to matriculate into college. I transitioned from what I call tough times and tough neighborhoods to Texas A&M University, where I had some very interesting and life-determining decisions and that I made. And at the end of the day, was able to, again, rely upon a government to help me in a time of need. I became a single parent in college and was able to rely upon welfare to take care of my son in Section 8 housing, on food stamps, and another government assistance to ultimately graduate, and went on from there to obtain 4 other degrees, including 2 master's degrees, my law degree, and my PhD at The Ohio State University. So understanding again how the role of government can play a very helpful role in someone's life is what leads me to is what leads me in the way that I approach my role as Attorney General, and that is to ensure that this office has someone in it that's looking out for Nevada families every single day. So whether it's in consumer protection, or whether it's in criminal justice and reform, or whether it's in the constitutional rights arena, I look out for Nevada families. And again, I draw and rely on and relate to my life's experiences in doing that.
Well, General, as a University of Maryland fan, a fellow Big Tenner these days, I won't hold your Ohio State background against you, but we can leave the rivalries on I would say the football field, but you all.
Well, Stephen, frankly, I'm not sure Maryland can hold anything against Ohio State, but that's beside the point. You set yourself up for that one, by the way.
I did. You can dunk on me all day, pun intended. One of the fascinating things that I think in the space with state attorneys generals is their changing role over the last probably 10 to 25 years. I think for most people, the role of attorney general was something that was always close to home. They were going after the fly-by-night contractor or the person who was upcharging at the gas station and things of that ilk. But really over the last couple decades, we've seen state attorneys general take a huge leadership role in the regulatory space. And from a dollars and cents amount, that's led to tens of billions of dollars in fines and settlements. What do you attribute the rise of state attorneys general to really being leaders and drivers in that regulatory space?
Well, I think part of it is brought about by necessity. What we came to see during my tenure, at least what I've come to see, is that sometimes we're the first line and oftentimes the last line of defense relative to unscrupulous entities or individuals trying to take advantage of the residents of our state. I do believe that a lot of folks don't even know what the Attorney General does. They think and they know that at least we put people in jail, but that's all they think we do. They don't know that, for example, we have consumer protection practices and consumer protection bureaus that look out for Nevadans in this instance when we see companies taking advantage of them from a consumer protection perspective. Or that we sometimes have to take on other governmental entities relative to the way they are treating Nevada, or that we represent Nevada in lawsuits where we have to sue, or sometimes when we are sued. So I think that as a matter of necessity, attorneys general have become more active and more willing to utilize the powers afforded them under our constitutions and statutes. I am one who believes in a very protective Attorney General's office, and I think my last 2 years in this office have demonstrated that.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. You hit on a couple different things. 2020 obviously was a rough year for many people with the pandemic, and it certainly saw a lot of activity in the state attorney general space. Why don't we look at this in kind of twofold? Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the issues that were prevalent and specific in Nevada? And then let's also talk about some of those national issues that you were able to partner with other state attorneys generals on.
Sure. So, on day 2 on the job, not day 1, I must acknowledge it was a pomp and circumstance and a bunch of hugging and congratulations on day 1. But on day 2 on the job, I gave what I called my first State of Justice speeches to everyone in my office. And I introduced what I called our 3 C's. We now have 5 C's that we operate under, and I've referenced some of them. The first C being consumer protection. The second C being the protection of constitutional and civil rights. The third C being criminal justice and reform issues. On the anniversary of my inauguration a year later, I introduced 2 additional C's that were already present, but I wanted to highlight. It was the opportunity for community engagement and community involvement, letting folks know that we do more than put people in jail, that we're your neighbors who shop at the same grocery stores you shop at. And there were also the soccer moms and dads. And so introducing ourselves to the community. And then the other C was client services, and clients broadly, again, being Nevadans, but also our institutionalized clients, our institutional clients, I should say. Looking at the different things that cropped up over the last year, there was a 6th C that introduced itself or thrust itself upon us, and that was COVID. COVID required us to look at different ways of protecting Nevadans, whether it was through price gouging issues that we saw early on with toilet tissue and cleaning supplies, being hiked up in pricing. It was enforcing our governor's directives related to eviction moratoriums against landlords who were intent on getting around those. It was also ensuring that we had, good information out there about COVID-related scams that were taking place. So there were a lot of things in the COVID arena that we had to address, and that was on top of the already full-time job that we had, generally speaking, protecting against unscrupulous businesses or individuals looking to take advantage of our residents. And internally, I'm happy to say, we're able to be nimble enough to provide services to thousands of Nevadans who called or emailed or reached out in various different ways with concerns that they had that fell within our purview. And if it didn't, we were able to refer them to the appropriate entities or agencies. And so, it's been a very busy year last year. It's begun busy as well. And we are delighted that we are in a position to be able to help as much as we can through my office of about 400 individuals.
Now, when your office is identifying and addressing individuals, what are the usual ways that those come in? I think many people just assume that it's always citizen complaints, and obviously that is one avenue. But I imagine there are other issues of policy and illegality that get brought to your attention. And what are some of those ways that your office identifies issues?
Yeah, well, we keep our finger on the pulse, so to speak, of what's happening nationally to ensure that if it is happening in our state, that we address it, or that if it is not happening in our state, that we try to keep it from happening. So we have 55 other states and territories and our counterparts in those areas that we correspond with on a daily basis or frequent and sometimes more than daily basis to keep abreast of those issues. But you have hit the nail on the head in one way, and that is that we do get a lot of consumer complaints from residents. And our website, ag.nv.gov, has links to consumer complaints. And oftentimes we get information both on the civil and criminal side of things that we have to route through our constituent services unit to the respective division within my office, and we try to address those. And so those are a couple of the ways that we keep ourselves abreast of what we need to be addressing in the communities.
And you alluded to this in part about some being in close contact with some of your fellow attorneys general. I think one of the areas where we've seen a lot of increased regulatory presence and really what I would describe as kind of a legal muscle flex is on multi-state actions, when numerous state AGs band together on a particular enforcement action. For our listeners who aren't otherwise familiar, how does that usually come about? And even just kind of the mechanics of whether that's the issue or whether it's the leadership team of the multi-state or the kind of the criteria that you might consider, is this something that we should be a part of or not?
Well, that's a great question, and it gives me an opportunity to dispel a myth. Obviously there's a lot of partisanship happening these days. It's in the news. It's all over the place. We hear all about Democrats and Republicans or one side versus another fighting against one another. But when I was in the state Senate, I learned that was about 5% of the cases. 95% of what we did in the legislature was bipartisan and sometimes unanimous. And comparably in the AG realm, there are a lot of items that are occurring nationally where we have bipartisan opportunities to work together as Democratic attorneys general or Republican attorneys general, because we have the same general mission, which is to protect our residents. And so through organizations that we have, for example, the National Association of Attorneys General, a bipartisan organization that convenes us on occasion and allows us an opportunity to converse with one another. We can learn about issues. We can learn about issues that are percolating and that might interest other states. And so through those types of conversations, we're able to engage in what you've indicated are multi-state actions. And there aren't always actions. Sometimes they're just investigations that don't lead to an action, but lead to inaction through a settlement, for example. But these are opportunities, I think, again, to demonstrate to the entirety of our constituency that some things transcend political lines, and it provides us an opportunity through multi-state actions to work together to protect the entirety of our country.
How do folks decide, or whether that's your office or in your conversations with other AG offices? In my experience, both from having been Deputy Attorney General in Virginia and now in the private sector, on particularly large multi-state actions, say where you have 40 plus states, that a consortium of those states, a smaller group, will take a leadership role, anywhere from 3 to 7. How do you figure out whether or not that's something states want to lead in, or whether they're signing on, and the level of participation that they take in one of those multi-state investigations?
Yeah, the answer to that varies. Sometimes it is a human resource issue. Some offices are larger than others. Sometimes it's a capacity issue. Sometimes it's a capability issue. Some offices have more specific areas of jurisdiction where they have more expertise, for example, in a particular arena, and we're able to rely upon their expertise from a capability perspective. But in all areas, we attempt to again, work in a bipartisan fashion. I can't think of a multi-state in which I've been involved, or my state has been involved, where we don't have Democrats and Republicans on the executive committee, for example, making the inquiries and updates to the rest of the attorneys general. But determining who's going to be that executive committee, again, it encompasses of varying issues from capacity to capability to expertise to human resources, and probably other things that I'm not considering right now.
Looking into 2021, I think kind of everyone's curious as to what the state AG priorities are going to be at a national level. I'm sure you've seen the articles and the headlines talking about ways to partner with the new presidential administration. What are some of the subject matter areas that you think are likely to be areas of focus for your office specifically, and for state AGs across the country nationally as we look around the corner through 2021?
Well, this is probably one of the instances when you talk about focusing on what the current administration is looking to do, that it may fall more along a partisan line than other instances. But some of the areas of focus that I've heard President Biden and his administration talk about that I'll be interested in working with them on are voting rights issues, expanding the franchise and allowing more people to get engaged and get involved. I'm looking forward to the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, for example, as one of the types of things that I see us being able to work on and help to contribute any expertise or knowledge to. Immigration issues, although it's a federal issue, ensuring that that what's happening on the ground in our states is being communicated to our federal counterparts, I think is important. Looking at criminal justice and criminal justice reform-based issues. I am looking forward to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, for example, being passed. There were a lot of things that were contemplated that were passed out of one house last administration that did not make it through the other house, that I think we have an opportunity to participate in conversation on, and I'm looking forward to that as well. I think some of the things that will remain a priority, irrespective of party, are, again, consumer protection issues. If there are, in fact, instances where there are antitrust concerns, for example, from a consumer protection perspective, you can see attorneys general working together, potentially with a Biden administration, to ensure that we continue the opportunities for competition out there. And so, those are some examples of ways in which I think attorneys general can work with the current administration, either on a partisan level or on a bipartisan level.
I know that when President Biden was Vice President Biden, during the time of the Recovery Act, he was kind of put in charge of managing and review on issues of waste and abuse as it pertained to monies that flew out from the federal government. Is there a space for state AGs in the enforcement of some of this money that has gone out from the federal government as it pertains to COVID relief?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, there is a opportunity for great partnerships with our federal counterparts, for example, in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the respective states, to ensure that we don't have fraud taking place in CARES Act, receiving CARES Act funds or the administration of those funds. There are opportunities, again, to ensure that we don't see a recurrence of stockpiling or recurrence of price gouging and things of that sort. And you mentioned COVID. That should have been something that I said out the box relative to opportunities to work with the current administration. We're all interested in ensuring that we could keep our residents safe. And so working with the current administration on the rollout and on the process and the progress of vaccinations would be something that we could help from, to the extent that we have the ability within our respective jurisdictions to engage in that type of activity.
Well, that's certainly, I'm sure, going to keep you and many of your colleagues very busy. This wouldn't be a timely podcast if I didn't ask your thoughts on some of the stock trading behaviors that have been going on in recent days, with the shorting of stocks and the stopping of certain trading. Do you have any thoughts on what's been going on, or is this a space that state AGs have a role to examine going forward?
Well, I'm going to limit my comments on this out of respect for any potential investigations that may be taking place that are unknown. But we do know that, for example, my colleague in New York, Tish James, has indicated that she is entertaining and reviewing the complaints around certain stock trading activities and the cessation of those by the companies that are operating in that arena. But comparably, my colleague in Texas, a Republican, has also indicated that he has issued civil investigative demands, CIDs for short, on those same types of issues. And so this is, again, an opportunity for bipartisanship from the vantage point of ensuring that our residents are being treated fairly and equally under these types of laws. And so, yes, I do see that as an opportunity for additional work within the AG's arena.
You've mentioned several times that, most of the work that gets done, hopefully gets done in a bipartisan nature, but acknowledge that there are sometimes those partisan divisions. And in that vein, congratulations, as you've recently been named a co-chair of the Democratic Attorneys General Association, affectionately referred to as DAGA.
Yeah.
Does DAGA have any particular interests and priorities specific to DAGA in 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're going to be convening to discuss those further. I can say at a minimum, though, that they align with the current administration's areas of focus. Again, I've talked about a few of those, from COVID and defeating that particular disease and getting us out of this pandemic, to issues related to criminal justice reform, to issues related to protecting the constitutional right to vote and things of that sort. So, environmental issues have been important to the Democratic Attorneys General Association, both in the Trump administration, will remain important in the and will likewise remain important in the Biden administration. So you will see us align with some of those areas of priority, and you will likewise hear us roll out, our own areas of priority over the coming months.
For many companies, working with state regulators and in particular state attorneys generals can be a challenge, if for no other reason than it perhaps isn't something that they do that often. I know from my time working in the Virginia AG's office that sometimes there's this kind of an educational component of people getting up to speed for what a civil investigative demand is, how those investigations differ from their federal counterparts, how it's different from general civil litigation. And that's only can be compounded and confused more because, as I believe you alluded to earlier in our conversation, not all state attorneys generals have the same powers. Some are as you alluded to, some are the top cop and, oversee every line prosecutor throughout their state. Others have very limited criminal prosecutorial powers. Some have large antitrust divisions. Some have one person. In your experience, what are some of the things that make working with the state AG office unique?
Well, look, man, you hit it on the head. I could have asked you, and you could have answered it because you just gave some great examples of what makes it unique. Listen, I think the best advice that I could offer folks when they are encountering or engaging with the AG's office is to do research on jurisdiction, or if you can't figure out how to do the research, feel free to ask. You've indicated that several offices have different areas of jurisdiction.
Yeah. Or ask their lawyer, right?
Or ask their lawyer, right. There are some of my colleagues that have no jurisdiction whatsoever in the criminal process. And there are others like I that have only a few areas of expertise, of jurisdiction in the criminal context. There are some that have, as you've indicated, expansive departments based on the sheer numbers. California, New York, for example, have large divisions and departments that allow them to take the lead on certain things. And so understand from a multi-state perspective, to reference your other question, but understanding the breadth and depth of these types of offices, I think is an important fact to have an understanding of when you start to engage with attorneys general offices.
How important and or appropriate is it for companies, particularly those that have unique business plans or disruptive technologies, to be proactive with state regulators and state attorneys general in particular? I always find it helpful to come in sometimes when it's appropriate and explain what that particular entity is doing, rather than wait for someone to complain out of misunderstanding what's going on.
Yeah.
So how helpful can those conversations be on a front end to make sure everyone's coloring within the line, so to speak?
Well, listen, as a general matter, before I answer, I'm going to back up and reference my days in the state Senate. I was Senate Majority Leader, as you've indicated. I was also Minority Leader, and I have seen, to use your phraseology, disruptive technologies come in and ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission, if you will, to operate. And from a legislative perspective, that created, some issues, some unnecessary turmoil. It's different when you're interacting with an AG, though, because you are begging for forgiveness when you may have actually broken the law. So being proactive and coming in asking for permission, so to speak, or at least some level of engagement with an attorney general. I shouldn't take permission because we don't have to give permission, right? I mean, reasonable minds can disagree on the application of law, but at least conversation around issues can help you get an understanding of what a particular attorney general interpretation is of his or her state's law on a particular issue. So conversation in full candor, entirely candid and truthful, is always a good approach to take, and it's one that I highly recommend.
That's fantastic. In general, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I just had one follow-up, which is to say that anyone who follows you on Twitter knows that you still have some moves back from your fraternity days. If you were going to suggest and or call out any of your colleagues to think who could do the same routines, who would you pick?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I would say this. There's one of my colleagues who is also my fraternity brother.
That sounds like a cop-out, though.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to put anybody else. I'm going to say it this way. Someone else tweeted, "Can your AG do this?" And the North Carolina AG, my colleague Mr. Stein, said no. So I'll leave that to him. But Kwame Raoul, the Attorney General from Illinois, he's my fraternity brother. I would put the challenge to him to maybe do as I did. I put out a video encouraging folks to take the vaccine for COVID. There, as you may know, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, the Black and Brown communities are disproportionately affected by COVID, and they're also disproportionately not taking the vaccine. And so to try to relay some of that trepidation, I utilize one of my fraternity's time-honored traditions of doing what we call caning, K-A-N-I-N-G. That's doing a particular routine with a cane, and I'll leave it to people to go look that up on my Twitter feed. But I would encourage General Raoul to match me on that and do the Don't Rush Challenge to encourage folks to take that vaccine. So there you have it.
I love it. The challenge has been laid down. General, Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on Holland and Knight's Eyes on Washington podcast, our State AG edition. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for listening to an Eyes on Washington podcast brought to you by Holland and Knight's Public Policy and Regulation Group. For more information on our Public Policy and Regulation Group, please visit hklaw.com/ppr.